Hey everybody, Eric Grenier here, and welcome to the 138th episode of the Writ Podcast. It's been quite the start to the year. We've got Justin Trudeau's resignation, a Liberal leadership race, there's Donald Trump, there's an Ontario election, so we've got so much to talk about. We'll just dive right in with the pollster panel. Dan Arnold is Chief Strategy Officer at Pollara and was the Liberals pollster during the last three federal election campaigns. Andrew Enns is Executive Vice President at Leger, and he conducted polling for Stephen Harper's Conservatives. And James Valkey is Director of Research and Strategy at Viewpoints Research and has worked on many central NDP campaigns. Hey, guys.
Hey.
Happy to be here. Lots to talk about.
Yeah, good to see everybody.
Just a little bit to talk about. Dan, first, I just want to say I've been really enjoying your podcast that you've been doing with Tyler Meredith and Van Dan, I think is their name. Is that it? Yes. But that's Race to Replace. It's all on the Liberal leadership race, and I'm glad that Dan has been able to fit us in for his very busy podcasting schedule. So we appreciate that.
I'd say Race to Replace, second best podcast in Canadian politics out there.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Check it out. Once you're done with the Writ, then you can go on and listen to that.
Yeah, for sure. So we'll try to get Dan not to say the same things he's going to say on the podcast with his Liberal
I've got
friends.
a whole list of different jokes today, don't worry.
Terrific. Love it. Okay, so there's so much to talk about, and if you're anywhere near the polling world right now, people are primarily talking about how the polls are not agreeing at the federal level. So before we actually get into some of the politics of it, I would like to hear you guys on what you think the actual climate and environment for public opinion is right now. Andrew, I'll start with you because I know that Leger just put out some new numbers on Wednesday. So in your assessment, where are things right now?
Well, you're right. We put out a poll with the National Post this morning. Was done over last weekend. What we're seeing is we still see a fairly sizable lead for the Conservatives nationally. But there's been some movement. I wouldn't call it I think some have described it as, looking at some numbers as a surge, Phoenix-like. I wouldn't go that far. But I think there has been some reevaluating with all sorts of events, and it's hard to predict what exactly is behind it. I think largely it's the resignation of the Prime Minister and that triggering a leadership campaign. And I think what that has done is that for the Liberal Party of Canada and that brand, I think they're on now week 3 of having what I would suggest probably their best consecutive weeks of media coverage on the brand than they've had probably in the last 12 to 18 months. We're not talking about government. We're not talking, about what are they doing about housing or what they haven't done about housing. What we're talking, the leadership candidates are all talking about what they're going to do. They're talking about how they're going to repeal some unpopular Liberal policies that have, raised the ire of Canadians. So I think generally that's having a bit of an impact. Our poll showed about a 4-point swing. Tories down 4, Liberals up 4, and the NDP are sort of getting caught up in the wash on this one a bit. Their numbers are not in a good spot, and so. But I think that is generally what's happening out there. There's a lot of things I think Canadians are trying to evaluate when they answer questions because there's a lot of different, things coming at them. But overall, I think from the electoral perspective, there's a little bit of reevaluation and there's been a bit of movement.
Dan, what's your read on where things are right now?
Yeah, and I guess there's been a lot of pollster-on-pollster violence this week, so I'll try not to pick a fight here with any of my colleagues on the panel and keep it pretty civil. Look, I think before we even get into this and start arguing about methodologies and that, it's worth just taking a step back and from a very high level, even asking what are we even doing in this industry, which is we're asking people on a horse race question, who are you going to vote for? Which is not really a real fair question these days because is it Justin Trudeau? Is it Chrystia Freeland? Is it Mark Carney? Voters are probably not even completely clear what they're being asked on these questions right now. So I think that explains some of the volatility. And, because there is that confusion out there, how you phrase the question and question ordering and methodologies and everything can probably have an impact to kind of pump numbers up or down just because it is a bit of an uncertain situation. Never mind an Ontario election that's on the horizon in Ontario as well, too. So I think what we can tell is that the Liberals have a bit of life. Voters are giving them a second chance. But, beyond that, it's, I think, really until the new leader comes in and kind of puts their stamp on things, it's going to be hard to tell if this is actually like a surge that will continue, that will actually make the next election competitive, or will they be back to right where they were, a month ago? I guess we'll find out in a couple of weeks.
James, what are you thinking? And especially with the NDP numbers, we haven't seen. They don't seem to have gotten a boost over the last few weeks. At the very least, I think we could probably say that with some certainty.
Yeah, I mean, what am I seeing? The Liberal brand was reaching new lows of polling floors that I think people thought they weren't going to see again, and they hadn't seen since Ignatieff, right? Like when they started modeling out riding results, I think there were a lot of people taking a deep breath and sitting down, and some of the moves we saw happen over the holidays did happen, and the Prime Minister resigned. Now, the Prime Minister resigning, does that boost the Liberals' favors? Well, it's unclear because they don't have a leader yet. And when you ask people in polling and groups, what if there was someone else? What if, this imaginary person took over? Would you think it's better off? And people have a rosy glow about that hypothetical next person. However, when things start coming down to earth and someone gets selected, then you'll see it settle. So right now, it's more, I would say some of the trends are they're not sticky, they're fluid, they're aspirational in nature. I wouldn't say dead cat bounce on the polling, but I would say that like the when they choose whomever they're going to choose, they are still going to have the same problems that existed before Justin Trudeau resigned, that they're still going to have to overcome, and people will get to see a person, and they'll get to put a real face to a brand, and that's when I think we can really get a sense of where it is. Now, polling methodology versus communications narratives are two different things. Sometimes they align, and sometimes people will use methodologies in polling to advance their own specific narratives. Like I said, the horse race polling can only tell us so much. I think once you start digging into the numbers, you get to see different things. And if I can be permitted, we saw polls a month or so ago that said who would be best positioned to replace, and it was clearly Chrystia Freeland, both on name recognition and potential. That is not the case today when we're starting to see some of that stuff. So things change, Eric, and I think it's polling doesn't wag the dog. I think politics above else demonstrates a snippet in time, as they say, of what we're seeing right now. And I think right now the answer is it's fluid. And as far as New Democrats are concerned, like I said, they've been steady for a while, for years. They've not dropped below a certain threshold, not gone above a certain threshold. I still think they're within that window. They're probably on the low end and need to be thinking about that. But again, it's fluid right now.
All right. Okay. So we won't say that there's any tail wagging of the political landscape right now.
I mean, if you're looking for the superior methodology, get in touch with me, and I'd be happy to talk over what your needs are and what methodology works best for your situation, for sure.
All right. Okay. There you go. All right. Well, one of the things we've been talking about, all the different aspects of politics right now that could be influencing the numbers. One of them is a pretty big influence south of the border, a man named Donald J. Trump. I believe that is what his name is. He is the president of the United States. And it is pretty unpredictable to see what he's going to say on any given day, talking about tariffs coming into Canada apparently on February 1st. We don't know what's going to happen in terms of that, but it has changed the conversation here. Dan, has the ballot box changed, a ballot box question changed because of Donald Trump? And what does that mean for each of the parties? The Conservatives, for example, have been, road mapping the election that they wanted, but it does seem like it might end up being an election about something else.
Yeah, it feels like a completely different election than the election we were speculating about even the last time we got together here on this podcast in November, because a couple of things have changed. I mean, the Conservatives clearly wanted a ballot question that was about Justin Trudeau, that was about the carbon tax. They have spent $30 million on those two specific topics, and those two specific topics are basically gone. And they'll try to keep shadowboxing them, and they'll keep trying to make it an issue. That's why, their attacks right now are, just like Justin and carbon tax, Carney and all that. But it's, it's not a forward-looking message if that's what they're going to be fighting about. So that has shaken up the board. And then the introduction of the new wild card, as you said, the biggest wild card of all wild cards, Donald Trump, certainly creates the potential that that will become the ballot question, or a potential ballot question for a lot of people in the next campaign. Pollara, we've been doing some tracking monthly for the last 2 years on how concerned Canadians are about different issues. And, for that entire time period, it's always been cost of living, housing, healthcare, like at the top of the list, and nothing else really close to it. And, in December, I saw tariffs kind of creeping up. And then on the poll that we were just out of field on last week, we've got tariffs basically on par with those other three issues as a concern for people. So I'm not saying that, healthcare has disappeared as an issue, or cost of living have disappeared as issues. Those are still there. But I think the introduction of tariffs certainly is something that you can easily imagine taking over an election campaign. And, wouldn't be the first time we've had an election fought over our relationship with the U.S. And I think, I don't know for sure if that's necessarily even bad news for the Conservatives, because you could argue that, Poilievre is the strongest leader to face Trump, and I'm sure they will eventually get to there in terms of their argument. But it changes the ballot question, it changes the equation, it shakes up the board. And, when the Liberals were 20 points behind, I think anything to shake up the board is welcome. So it's a new election than the election we were talking about last year.
Yeah, and apologies to any listeners. A hazard of recording anything in Canada is there's a snowplow outside of my little office here. Andrew, what do you think the Conservatives have to do now? If the issue has changed, and I think it's pretty clearly that the ballot box issue is going to change a bit, what kind of recalibration will they have to do?
Well, I think 100% right that the environment has changed. Certainly from last time we had a conversation, around Christmas, things started to move pretty quickly, and I think the Conservatives have to be careful about, first of all, rushing into sort of a new position, because I think, as Dan said, we're not 100% sure where this is going to go. I mean, we're all now sitting on pins and needles because of February 1st, but we'll see. And I think the issue, I sort of differ a bit with Dan in terms of sort of the public perception. I mean, we put something out in Ontario, we're top of mind issue, just, kind of on that unaided. And, U.S. relations and tariffs have definitely sort of popped into the conversation, but I'm not convinced it's actually replacing the concerns. And I'm sort of drifting a little bit provincial here, but the household voter, I think, still very much is seized with affordability, concerns about that, healthcare, depending on where you are in the country, crime, public safety are still sort of up in that matrix. So I think it's important for the Conservatives to not rush into sort of a new position in terms of how they're going to sort of position, approach the ballot and the ballot box question, but understand a little bit where things start to shake out. If it's tariffs, it's not going to be necessarily the actual tariff or the word tariff, but what's the implication of that on the voter? Like, you may have the ability to pivot that into affordability. It suddenly may become about job security, our economic survival. Like, that's where it's a little bit unpredictable. I think for sure, and I completely agree with Dan. I mean, when you're 20 points back, or whatever, changing up picking up the pieces and putting them back into the Yahtzee thing and putting it out might be the best that could happen. And I think it probably is. It puts I think it does put the Conservatives a little bit back on. I'm not going to say even keel with the other parties. I still think they still have some tremendous advantages in their quiver, but certainly on the strategic side of the messaging, I think they have to rethink things a little bit, and things are going to move fast. I mean, and that's going to be a challenge for everybody. I mean, they're going to have to rethink things when a new leader is elected for the Liberal Party of Canada in terms of what that is, and they're also going to have to factor into that the unfolding and very unpredictable nature of our relations with the U.S. Like, I haven't seen one smart person sit up there and go, this is what's going to happen. Like, prepare yourself. Like, everybody realizes that it's a very unpredictable time with this individual. And so, that is going to be a bit of a challenge, but, we'll see. We'll see where makes things a little more exciting if you're in the business.
We're going to get to it when we talk about Ontario, but that might be a factor there. We don't really know what's going to happen over the next 4 weeks. When you think about Trump has been a president now for 9 days, and we got the 28-day campaign in Ontario based on the idea around the tariffs, that could go off the rails pretty easily. James, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I'll definitely get into it on the Ontario stuff, but the Trump's reelection, the 25% tariffs, this is a black swan event for Canada's economy. This can turn things upside down. I think that there is a sentiment of anxiety and existential dread with that. I was nodding violently with Andrew because he's right on the fact that we're seeing it trending up, but the linkage of a hypothetical threat to real people's lives is not quite there yet. But it's the consequences of the tariffs are gigantic in so much that we have an economically porous border. Like the Gordie Howe Bridge, a $6.5 billion bridge that has been added to Windsor to increase that porosity of economic trade, is set to open this fall. Like, if there's no trucks on it, that's going to be a huge problem, right? Like, there is so much invested about things going back and forth across our border. A 25% tariff would be debilitating. And in having said that, like, I do think that on positioning, because the saliency is creeping up, but for party positioning, it is also very not clear in polling who has the right approach on this and what political ideology people are committed to, or if that doesn't matter at all. And the approach is a Team Canada approach, and that's what comes out. I know there's tons of research out there in the field right now trying to unpeel this onion and find out what the best position is and who has the advantage over the other and what messaging works, because it's absolutely not clear. And I think we see even amongst the conservative premiers, there are divergent opinions. Doug Ford is all Team Canada. Danielle Smith has put up her elbows on Alberta, right? Like, those are different approaches, and they are noteworthy, and they are being the data is unclear which is the best approach. And I think that we'll get to Ontario, but I think if any election is going to show us the results of how this impacts people, it is going to be that one, and we're going to find out in a month.
I will say,
yeah,
just
Andrew, go
for the
ahead.
record, Francois Legault also is putting his elbows up. In terms
Correct. Yes, indeed.
Dan or Andrew, I don't know if either of you have a thought on what public opinion shows people do want to see from their leaders, or if it is still, as James says, unclear what kind of approach they want to go into. Either of you can jump in.
So I in the poll we put out yesterday, there was a question in there toward the end, and the Post will pick up on it today on just the fairness side to what James kind of referenced. Daniel Smith was somewhat criticized for putting the Alberta first versus Canada first sort of position, but we put a question in terms of just whether or not, would you be prepared if your province had to suffer significant consequences as respect to a Canadian retaliatory sort of response. I'm paraphrasing the question, it's a little more elegant. The reality is no province is putting their hand up to take the bullet for the team on this one. Certainly Albertans and Quebecers are ahead of the game in terms of saying, hold on, we know where the pain points are. We're not prepared to be the sacrificial lamb. But Ontario, the Atlantic provinces, no one necessarily wants to bear the brunt. So there is a bit of that Team Canada, the broad strategy that sort of dilutes the pain, so it'd be. I mean, Donald Trump isn't targeting Ontario or Quebec. He's targeting Canada. And so I think you see Canadians in that response saying the response needs to be Canadian. And I think that's in that sense, there's a bit of that, perspective from leaders. And I will say, just in some of the polling I've seen on the provincial side, I don't think Doug Ford's hurt himself in his positioning on it so far. In terms of when you're looking for premier responses, leadership responses, he hasn't done bad. I've seen some numbers where his favorables have sort of crept up a little bit. That striking that tone of sort of that passive aggressive is probably something that Canadians don't mind seeing when it comes to confronting a guy like Donald Trump.
Dan, I don't know if you have anything to want to add.
Yeah, I think it's difficult. I think certainly there'd be polling that shows people want to see retaliatory tariffs. They want to see a buy Canadian approach. There's things like that they conceptually would like. But conceptually is one thing when it actually means that, people were complaining about inflation for the last 2 years. Like inflation is going to look pretty small compared to what happens if we've got tariffs on every U.S. Food product that comes into the country, right? So, I think when the rubber hits the road on this, the consequences may not be things people are actually thinking about right now when they're answering polling questions. And there's a lot of degrees of how retaliatory tariffs look and who benefits and who gets hurt by them. So I think this is a very live topic and one where public opinion could change quite quickly depending on how things are rolled out.
One of the things that it seems that it could have an impact on, and the Liberal leadership race could have an impact on it as well, is the election timing. The Liberals coming forward with apparently some emergency legislation that maybe they want to put forward, and then what would that mean in terms of getting votes in the House and all this kind of stuff. There's also the question of what happens if Mark Carney wins the Liberal leadership race. Does he even wait to go to the House because he's not going to get to sit there? Dan, especially from the Liberal leadership side, does the potential of Mark Carney winning change your thoughts about when the election would be?
No, ultimately it's still in the hands of the opposition parties, and they are all still signaling they're going to vote down the government. Now that could change if the gap between the Liberals and the NDP was a point or two a couple of weeks ago. Now it's 5 or 6 points. If it grows wider and wider, maybe Jagmeet Singh will have a change of heart and, for the good of Canada, support the government or something like that. But I think one thing to consider from a Liberal perspective, though, is if they even want to keep the House alive longer than they need to. Because, if you look at historical leadership races, and you were talking about this in your write-up on the Writ as well too, Eric, there's usually a bit of a bounce that comes out of them during the leadership race. And I think no matter who wins, there's going to be a lot of excitement about the new leader and media reporting. And there should be a bit of a honeymoon that comes from that. But historically speaking, that bounce has tended to fade over time. So, you could argue that the best chance for the Liberals is to just ride the wave that's coming out of this leadership race, go into an election right away. And once you're in an election campaign, there's spending limits, so you're not going to have to deal with a $30 million conservative attack ad campaign against the new Liberal leader, which you will if you draw it out too much longer, right? Like the Conservatives are going to raise the bazooka at the next Liberal leader and just fire everything they've got as quickly as they can. So the sooner you get into a Writ campaign when spending limits come into play, there's a certain appeal to that there. So I think the Liberals might be looking for an early election. The downside is logistics. It's scary to think about like candidate recruitment and getting a platform and campaign and everything ready like within a couple of weeks. Like that gives me a lot of heartburn if I'm working at Liberal headquarters. But from a pure public opinion perspective, I don't mind the idea of going into a campaign right out of the leadership.
What would you put the odds of a Writ drop between March 9th and March 24th?
1 in 3. I don't know. We'll see.
Oh, okay. James, what about the NDP in this? Jagmeet Singh has made it pretty clear he'll vote down the government at the next opportunity, but he's also said that he could work on the emergency measures. I suppose you could pass those and then defeat the government as soon as they're become law. But do you think the NDP will pull the plug as they said that they will?
Yeah, I don't know. And this kind of gets back to the point about what is the right position going forward. Because while Doug Ford and Daniel Smith have different positions, they're not running against each other, right? Like they are running against their respective provincial counterparts and federally. And I think this is something that the Conservatives are struggling with themselves, right? The Team Canada approach is seems to be what people are attracted to and glomming onto, and this like kind of everybody's pulling together. We're doing this as one. And when you start building contrast between the Prime Minister and the leader of the official opposition, if Pollara is too critical about this, he risks looking like he's not being a team player, right? So they're finding a hard time figuring that out. And I think New Democrats are probably down the same path of trying to determine what the best approach of this is. Whether it is like, if the tariffs come, it will be a response that is required akin to COVID-19, a 2008 economic crisis. Or people will be seeking something like that. Like there will be a narrative out there that that is what is going to need to happen. Divergence from that is a challenge for any opposition party. So it'll be a matter of deciding how one-off some kind of an agreement like that is going to be in response to that, or how much that entangles you with supporting the government again, right? So New Democrats could support, like there's a scenario in the future where they support a one-off situation. The Conservatives strongly oppose it, and the Conservatives come out looking like the losers out of it because they're in opposition to some Team Canada approach. It's again, these are fine lines everybody is trying to walk right now, and it's not clear. But I mean, Dan was talking about the Conservatives ads, and it made me think of like at the end of the Super Bowl where they have T-shirts already printed about who is the winner. I'm positive the Conservative Party has a warehouse full of Mark Carney attack apparel and Chrystia Freeland attack apparel, and whichever one wins is whose apparel will get released to the public. There will be no shortage of ads to take them down, and there's so much happening right now, Eric. It is impossible to determine what the next steps of any of these people are going to be.
I'm most curious what their Ruby Doll attack ads look like. Those are the ones I really want to see.
And guys, way too much credit for the organization of Conservative
We'll see in a
Party,
couple of
whatever.
years some of those conservative attack hats, maybe in some other country.
That's
as
right.
they offload.
Circulating
I know there's a bunch of Axe Attack shirts that are probably going on discount anytime soon.
Yeah.
They
Whatever.
might be, yeah.
Yeah, a little souvenir. Andrew, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this. I mean, for the Conservatives, it seems like they'll pull the plug as soon as they can.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I would say for sure, but again, to the points made by Dan and James, I mean, if there is a significant, well thought out, subscribed to package, all premiers are on board, it's a Team Canada, Rescue Canada, like it will give some pause for thought in terms of how best to approach. So, I mean, nothing's a given. I kind of go back to what Dan said and agree on all the points about the earlier call by the Liberals and capturing the momentum and avoiding whatever. I also think that, I mean, just my team sport attitude, better to pull the pin yourself than wait for the other guys to pile on and pull it for you. Like, the new leader, whoever it is, within a week you've got your team. I mean, you might as well just tell them you're not going anywhere, guys. I'm sure they said that going in. It's like this isn't a leadership commitment. If we win, we're going keep the team together, and you might as well go and go to the people and get the mandate. I think on your own and try to set the terms out of the gate as best you can in the election would be my sense.
It's going to be a challenge, I think, for Carney and Freeland's team that they have to plan for a few weeks after the election campaign, but you also can't the leadership campaign, but you also can't take it for granted that you're going to win. You got to try to win the race and then move over quickly.
And you have to do a government transition too, which is a whole operation. I mean, you look historically after the last three elections, the Liberals spent like 40 days each time on transition. You've got to squeeze that into a week or two. So there's a lot to do.
And you're doing this while talent and resources are extremely spread thin from a red team point of view with the Ontario election underway.
Yeah. Dan, since you're the closest one to it, we're all just looking on the outside in. Why don't we just move to the Liberal leadership race and just give us a sense, what's your read on where things are in it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one where we don't have a lot of data, and we're all people who like data here. And, once we have some fundraising numbers made public, and even once the list, I mean, we had the membership cutoff now, but the party's still going to have to clean the lists and remove duplicates and things like that. So, I'm not sure when the campaigns will get access to lists, but I imagine once they do, they'll do some polls, and we'll probably, at least through back channels, kind of hear what the buzz is in terms of how the membership is breaking down. Certainly on the endorsement front, Carney is doing quite well, but endorsements are a small percentage of the points that are on the table because every riding is worth the same. So it's great that he's got a bunch of MPs backing him, but what's going to ultimately decide this are the Liberals in rural Alberta and Saskatchewan and places where they don't win seats, because their vote's going to matter a lot in a system where every riding is worth the same. And honestly, I don't know if I have a huge line of sight into how they feel about the candidates. I think Carney's certainly the favorite right now, and Freeland's probably second, and you'd think Karina Gould is third, kind of based on just sort of vibes. But we're kind of only going off of vibes right now, so it's hard to predict anything. I did see some data that was put out yesterday that Carney has spent close to $100,000 on digital ads, and the other campaigns didn't seem to have, at least based on publicly available stuff on the Facebook ad library. So, I mean, that speaks to certainly having resources and money that they can spend, which is probably a good indication that they've got a full force campaign with lots of money behind it. And in a short leadership race, if you're doing well in the polls, which he seems to be right now, and you've got a lot of resources and a lot of people behind you, I mean, that's a pretty good combination when you've only got a couple of days or weeks to wage a leadership race. There's not a lot of time for an insurgent campaign to really capture the hearts and minds of liberals. I think if you had a 6-month race, there'd be ample opportunity for someone like a Karina Gould or somebody who's not as well known but is a strong performer to actually excite people and make a name for themselves and rise up the ranks. But given the timeline, it's money, it's name recognition, and it's organization, and Carney's got all three of those.
And if he is raising a lot of money and he runs a surplus at the end of the campaign, it goes back into party coffers, right? So they would be able to use that in those first couple of weeks after he becomes leader if he would win, and as you said, maybe decide to go early or not. James and Andrew, I want to ask you what you think is going on in the Liberal leadership race, because it's another planet for both of you. But I would like to hear from both of you from the party perspective. The NDP watching this, what they want to see, or what opportunities they see, and the Conservatives watching this, what they do, what they see. James, why don't you go first? If the NDP is watching this leadership race, is there a candidate they want to win among the front runners, and how do they realign their position based on who ends up winning?
Yeah, I'm not sure that there is a front runner. And I'll preface this by saying leadership contests are, and I tell people this, the nice to haves are good communications and endorsements. The must haves are organizers and friggin' operators on the ground who can move units and get votes for you. That's the game, right?
Need some bagmen too, though.
Yeah, of course. Yes, you really do. I mean, that's part of the equation. But as far as that goes, it'll come down to that, and I wouldn't know publicly who has best behind the scenes organizers. But as far as positioning on strategy and communications, I think for the New Democrats, they could make hay out of either of them replacing Trudeau. Conservatives have already made their position clear. They're going to firebomb the new leader into existence and connect them through DNA sequencing with Justin Trudeau. New Democrats, I think, will have to position themselves the same way they have had to position themselves in the last little while, is trying to find distance between a Liberal brand that is faltering, the things they've delivered, and what they're offering is going to be Canadians. They need to position themselves in a way that lets Canadians connect with them on a personal level, lets them know. I mean, every leader needs to do this. However, I think that from Democrats, there's opportunities. Trudeau is a very good communicator, connected with people very well. It's not clear to me whether Freeland or Carney are, let's be clear, they're the only two people who are going to, in this race, are going to be able to do that. You know, they bring different things to the table, and there might be a lane for New Democrats to be a bit more connected to the ordinary person, kitchen tables for the people, that sort of stuff. But it's very unclear to me how the consequences of Conservative ad campaigns will impact the general public's perception on the next Liberal leader.
Andrew, what do you think? The Conservatives, are they salivating over a Carney or a Freeland leader, or would they prefer that Trudeau decides to stay on?
Yeah. So, look, I think the points taken by both other folks. Leadership races are really a mug's game, especially for folks like us who do the public opinion polling, and we put what we're putting leadership numbers out. We talked about it earlier. Carney has had a great week and head and shoulders. But I remember early days when Peter MacKay and Aaron O'Toole are going at it. Peter MacKay was a lock. Right, it was well over 2-1, and kept that way almost even amongst Tory supporters. But it's to the point made, name recognition and reputation and stuff. And so I think I think from the Conservatives, it's pretty clear in the race that Mr. Carney has the Trudeau team kind of backing and behind him, and I think you see that in terms of the organization. I mean, the Liberal Party of Canada was very much populated, as one would expect, with 10 years as leader, with Trudeau supporters and folks. So they have largely, lined up with Mr. Carney. I think there's things about Mr. Carney that the Conservatives are looking at and saying to themselves, a few things reminiscent to Michael Ignatieff in terms of his connectivity to the average Canadian and some of his past roles. So I don't think they're particularly afraid of Mr. Carney, but it's certainly he is outside, and I think when you look at what's propelling some of his standing right now is the fact that he is actually removed from government. And I think that's important. And I think he's trading a bit on that because a lot of people are very, very dissatisfied with the government. And so his being a bit of an outsider. Ms. Freeland's doing her best to try to establish herself as sort of a break, but it's challenging. I mean, if there was someone else to run against other than Justin Trudeau, it would have been Ms. Freeland. So I think that's the for Conservatives, their thinking is probably more about understanding the Carney connection with voters, weaknesses, things like that. And I don't think, I think they've, they certainly see some opportunity and has been said, I'm sure there's probably working on ideas as we speak. But, and I will say one thing about endorsements. Heather Stephenson had, I think, every caucus member in Manitoba endorse her. But one thing you need to be wary of is that when you're an unpopular government, party members actually hold not just the leaders, but the members of parliament somewhat responsible. So the fact that MPs are endorsing Mr. Carney could mean a lot of party members are going like, where were you when this thing was going off the rails 3-4 years ago? Like, you didn't put your hand up then. So it is an unpredictable thing. There's 100 points, and we'll see when things get counted.
There's another scenario, Eric. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, one of you go. Dan, James, you go
Both just
first.
want to jump in there. Since we're on a polling podcast here, I did want to talk a bit about the polling of the race. And Andrew is right that polls among Liberal voters are going to be a completely different audience than Liberal registered voters in this leadership race. It's different types of things they're going to base their vote on, and what a media poll on Liberal voters tells you probably doesn't really tell you what's happening in the race. But where I think the polls make a difference is Leger, the poll they put out this week, I think showed Carney a little more popular with Canadians than Freeland. Angus Reid had a poll that showed Carney a bit more popular with Freeland. If there becomes a polling consensus that Carney is more electable than Chrystia Freeland, electability is usually the thing that decides these leadership races, right? So if we see a lot of polls that show Liberals have a better chance with Carney, I think that will have an impact on how the people voting this race actually base their decision, because they're going to look at that and say, well, I guess that's our better chance to win. And what do Liberals care about more than winning? Not a lot.
That's a good point.
Electability should be, yes, and electability should be what determines leadership races, but it's not always the case, Dan. I was in a focus group recently, and maybe this is another scenario. Some person refused to believe that the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, was going to resign, and he's got a plan to actually run for the Liberals in the next campaign. Maybe he was projecting senior Conservative leadership aspirations, but I had to convince him that no, in fact, there is a leadership race. But hey, one never knows in today's world, right?
Hey, with all the AI stuff, maybe Trudeau never resigned. We all just got fed a fake video there. Let's close with the Ontario election. The writ dropped today on Wednesday. Doug Ford went to the LG yesterday to start that campaign. Voters will be voting on February 27th. Andrew, was this a smart move by Doug Ford to go early? He was only supposed to go in June 2026. Was it a smart move, or was it a risky one?
Well, I've got to probably pick a bit of the fence on this one. I think looking at the polls, looking at the situation with the opposition parties, looking at the issue matrix and the unpredictability coming at us from south of the border, I think there's lots of arguments to say that To go into all those, to go into this the challenges with the U.S. with a a year left on a mandate, maybe it's you need more time, you need more stability, and so I think there is an argument to say to go early, but there's risk. Like, I mean, I think for sure. My sense is it's the exception that the voters punish the person who called the election early for just going early. I don't think that's necessarily the risk. Like, I don't think Ontario voters are going to say, "Oh, you're just being opportunistic." Blah blah. I think the risk is that you still need to be fully prepared to not only run on the U.S. situation and threats, but I'm back to my earlier point about the issue matrix in Ontario. I think you also need to be prepared to speak to the other things that are a big concern to Ontarians. Like, if the Trump tariffs don't come in until, let's say, he says, "Oh, well, now it's going to be March 1." Well, now you've got to start talking about your record for sure, and he will have to defend that record. You've got to address the affordability challenge that is still a big concern, and healthcare is, well, it's no different in Ontario than it is in just about everywhere else in the country, and so that you just need to make sure you're ready for that. And I mean, there was the dial changed because of Trump and some of the ramping up of that. So there is this and the opposition is weak at this stage, but you can give them air. Everybody's going to get their same amount of airtime. Bonnie Crombie, who's hasn't done super, but she is now going to get equal billing as the premier, and likewise for Mayor Stiles, and they've struggled to get their equal billing up until now, but that'll change. So there is a bit of risk, but we'll see.
Bonnie Crombie wearing a hat emblazoned with some slogan this today, so I think this is the new fashion choice for political leaders. Wear a hat with your slogan just right on it so no one can miss it. James, what's your read on whether Ford made a risk or made a gamble that might not pay off, or whether he played his hand the best he could?
Well, first and foremost, as a very proud Southern Ontario boy, it's nice that people are finally treating Ontario like the center of the universe it actually is, okay? I'm really happy to be talking about it. But in all seriousness, I mean, I can't understate how important this election is going to be to the confluence of federal politics. Everyone will be watching this and the outcome and how things play out. 1/3 of the seats in Parliament, it's going to be consequential. So on the issue of Ford, I think he is taking a gigantic risk. And here are the reasons why. His campaign is premised on two things. It's on three things. One, that the tariffs are going to be the number one issue and they are going to come in on February 1. Like Andrew said, that might not happen. And your bus emblazoned with Protect Ontario might seem less relevant to the actual issues people want to talk about. Two, he is gambling that the issue of tariffs is going to be the more salient issue than cost of living, healthcare, education, and the anxiety Ontarians are living through. And he might have to connect those two issues together. But again, that's more work. And he's gambling that this is going to be the biggest issue, the vote determining issue. And three, he's also gambling that he is uniquely qualified to respond to it. And this is what I was talking about before. It is not clear that Doug Ford is the only person who can respond on behalf of Ontarians and fight for Ontario people to defend these jobs against tariffs. He is gambling on all of those things. And to be perfectly honest, this is the first election that Ford has ever had to really try. The first win was anti-win campaign. The second win, they spent more time talking about the majority they were going to get to depress voting. The vote turnout is not going to be 44% this time. It's going to be much higher. And he has to work hard to motivate them. I think it's a big gamble. I think it's a huge risk. Ask me in a month whether it was the right decision or not. But things can change really fast in these conditions. And I think he's going to be up for a bigger fight than he expected. He's getting a lot of... We talk about horse race numbers, but the the preconditions to change are the underlying numbers of favorability, unfavorability, change sentiment, personal response to the leader. And Ford is not leading on those amongst premiers, and other stuff could catch up. Like, he's got some favorabilities, but he's also, as Andrew said, he's got a record, and incumbents are having a really hard time. And if you're not out there defending or connecting to people about the struggles that are going on in their lives, you look out of touch. I think he's got a big hill to climb, and like Andrew said, it's going to be a chance for the Ontario voters to kick the tires on the other two leaders, see what they like, see what they don't like. And it's unclear whether Ford's tariff gambit is going to pay out.
I think the boldest prediction I heard there is that turnout will be much higher than 44%. I am doubtful.
You can remove much from that sentence, and then you can quote
it's
me.
on the record.
No. That was a slip of the tongue. Happens every time.
Dan, what's your view on the Ontario election?
So I'm doing some polling for Bonnie Crombie, so I'm not going to make a bold prediction here. That would probably not be wise on the show. But I do think, this question about the early election call is probably what it will hinge on. We've seen many times voters just kind of shrug their shoulders and whatever, like politicians being opportunistic, what else is new? But I did the polling in the 2021 federal election, and I sure remember the first week of that campaign, and voters were not just shrugging their shoulders. There was a backlash to the early election call, and that was showing up quite clearly in the tracking that first week there. And I think Abacus had some polling last summer that showed not a lot of anger about the idea of an early election call, but then when you put a price tag on it, then it was, 30, 40, 50% of Ontarians actually were angry at that situation. So, if things like the $175 million cost of the election, or the Auditor General's report Monday about, spending however many billions of dollars to get booze into convenience stores early, that is usually something that voters look at and say, like, this isn't the priorities of a leader. They should be focused on fixing healthcare and other things. So I think that's the risk for Ford. To that end, I guess we'll see the first week. The other two gentlemen here said wait a month, but I think we can wait the first week and see if there's any kind of backlash to the early election call, and that will at least tell us if this is going to be a competitive election or not.
Yeah.
I should add. Andrew reminded me I'm doing some Viewpoints. Will be doing some work for the March Styles campaign as well too.
All right. Okay. Well, we expect that you will share those numbers with the public here. At your earliest convenience. All right, going to be a lot going on, and apparently we're all going to be very busy over the next little while. So I appreciate you taking some time to go over some of this, because it is a lot, and everything's happening all at once, and it's great for us, and we'll see how the voters are going to react. So thanks a lot, guys.
Excellent.
Thanks, Eric.
Good to be back.